Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to another lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to give you top tips on how to pass the IELTS reading test. This video is going to be part 2. If you want to have a look at the part 1 video on how to pass the IELTS reading test, then have a look at my pinned comment where you will find a link to that video. In this lesson, I'm going to explain to you exactly what you need to do when you're answering all these different types of questions, 6 to 14. For each type of question, I'm going to explain to you what you're expected to do. I'm also going to explain to you what skills you need to score high marks in that question type. And finally, I'm going to give you tips on exactly what you need to do to get more marks in that particular question type. Now, let's begin with number 6, and that is multiple choice questions. Now, when it comes to the multiple choice questions, you are supposed to choose the correct answer to a question or the correct ending to a sentence from usually 3 or 4 possible options. So you are given 3 or 4 possible options and you're expected to choose the correct answer to a question or the correct ending. Now, what skills do you need to do well in this type of questions? You need to be able to scan for specific information. Scanning means you're not reading for detail, you're simply searching for specific information. So don't waste time reading. Okay? Instead, search for specific information. Make sure that you understand information in the passage. Now, what tips am I going to give you to make sure that you score high marks in the multiple choice questions? Listen very carefully. Tip number 1, paraphrase the information in the question and in the options. Okay, so paraphrase the information in the question and then in the options that you have been given. Then locate the precise information in the passage. Remember, answers come in order, okay? And answers are usually letters A, B, C, or D. So please read the instructions carefully to check. Now let's move on to question type number 7, and that is the list selection types of questions. What are you supposed to do in this section? You are supposed to choose the correct option from a list of words, information, or names. Okay, so you are given a list of words, information, or sometimes names. Now, this differs from the multiple choice type of questions because the questions all relate to only one long list of possible answers. Okay, so don't confuse this with the multiple choice questions because in this case, the questions all relate to one long list of possible answers. Now, what skills do you need to do well in the list selection type of question? You need to be able to scan for information. Remember, I said scanning is searching for specific information. You need to be able to understand information in the passage. And then you need to identify ideas relating to others. My top tips to do well in the list selection type of questions: read through the list and prepare paraphrases, okay? Tip number 1, read through the list and prepare paraphrases. And then read through the questions and identify key words, okay? Locate the information in the passage. So tip number 1, read through the list and prepare paraphrases. Tip number 2, read through the questions and identify key words. And then the third tip, locate the information in the passage. Remember, Answers come in order and they're usually letters A to G. So please read the instructions carefully to check. Now let's move on to number 8, and that is choosing a title. What are you supposed to do in this type of questions? Now, you're supposed to choose the most appropriate title from the list that you have been given. What skills do you need to do well in this section? You need to be able to identify aims of a passage. And also you need to be able to distinguish between detail and the main aims. Very, very important that you're able to tell the difference between detail and the main aims. My top tips to do well in this section. Tip number 1. Please look at the differences between the possible titles that you have been given. Then pay attention to the opening paragraphs and closing paragraphs of the passage. Remember, don't spend too much time on this question because it's only worth 1 point. Okay? Now, let's move on to question type number 9, and that is classification questions. What are you supposed to do in this type of questions? You're supposed to decide which category the information belongs to from a list. So you're given a list and you're supposed to decide which category the information belongs to. Now, what skills do you need to do well in this section? That is, you need to locate the information in the passage. You need to be able to locate the correct information in the passage, but also you need to be able to categorize information. My top tips to do well in the classification questions. Tip number 1, find information in the passage. 2, decide which category the information belongs to. And thirdly, look out for paraphrases. Now let's move on to number 10, and that is matching sentence endings. What are you supposed to do in this type of questions? You're supposed to complete sentences by matching the start of the sentence with the correct ending given in a list. So, your task is to complete sentences by matching the start, that is the beginning of the sentence, with the correct ending given in a list. What skills do you need to do well here? In this section, you need to be able to locate information in the passage, and you also need to understand information. My top tips to do well in the matching sentence endings type of questions. Tip number 1, read through the sentences and then read through the possible endings. Okay? Then prepare paraphrases. Tip number 3, find information in the passage. Tip number 4, choose the best ending to match the information in the passage. Next tip, remember, the completed sentence must be grammatically correct. Okay? The completed sentence must be grammatically correct. Another tip, remember, sentence beginnings follow the order of information in the passage, okay? So sentence beginnings are going to follow the order of information in the passage. Also, remember that answers are usually letters A to G. So read instructions carefully to check. And remember, very, very important, there are usually more endings given than you need. Also, remember, answers do not always come in order. Now, let's move on to question type number 11, and that is table completion. Now, what are you expected to do in the table completion type of question? Your task is to complete the table using the correct word from the passage. So you're supposed to complete the table using the correct word from the passage. What skills do you need to do well in this section? Firstly, you need to be able to locate specific information in the passage. You also need to be able to choose appropriate words. So you need to be able to choose suitable words. And finally, you need to be able to understand details. Now, to do that, my top tips are: first, read the column headings in the table. Okay, read the column headings or titles in the table. Secondly, identify the type of word needed for each part of the table. That is, identify the type of word needed for each part of the table. And then scan the passage for information. Remember, I said scanning is searching. Search through the passage for information. Another tip, remember, answers are often located in a specific part of the passage. And my final tip on how to do well in the table completion section is to check how many words you can use for the answer. Okay? Now, let's move on to question type number 12, and that is flowchart completion questions. Now, what are you expected to do in this section? You're expected to complete the flowchart using the correct words from the passage. So your task is to complete the flowchart using the correct words from the passage. What skills do you need to do well in this section? First, you need to locate specific information in the passage. You also need to be able to choose appropriate words, that is, suitable words. And finally, you need to be able to understand details and order of information. My top tips to do well in the flowchart completion questions are the following. Tip number 1. Please identify the type of word needed for each part of the flowchart. Okay? Secondly, scan the passage for information. Remember, answers do not always come in order in this section. So use the direction of the arrows and boxes to follow the order of information in the chart. Another tip that I'm going to give you, select the appropriate words from the passage and check the number of words that can be used for each answer. Now let's move on to question type number 13, and that is diagram completion questions. So what is your task? You're expected to label a diagram, okay? Your task is to label a diagram. Now, what skills do you need to do well in this section? You need to be able to locate information in the passage, relate the information to the diagram, and choose appropriate words. My top tips to do well in the diagram completion questions. Tip number 1, identify the type of word needed for the answer. For example, is it a noun? Is it a verb? Secondly, find the information in the passage. Finding does not mean reading for detail. It just means you need to search. So search for the information in the passage. Tip number 3. Remember, the information is usually located in one specific paragraph or two in the passage. So don't look everywhere. because the information is going to be located in one specific paragraph or two in the passage. Next tip that I'm going to give you, check how many words you can use for the answer. And finally, my friends, remember, answers do not always come in order in this section. Now, finally, let's look at question type number 14, and that is short answer questions. What are you expected to do? What's your task? Your task, my friend, is to answer questions regarding details in the passage. What skills do you need to do well in this section? You need to be able to locate information in the passage, and you need to also understand detail and specific information. My top tips to do well in the short answer questions. Tip number 1, identify the type of words you need for each answer. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? What type of word do you need for the answer? Tip number 2, paraphrase vocabulary in the questions. Tip number 3, scan the passage to locate the information. Remember to check how many words you can use for the answer, and most importantly, remember that answers come in order. So there you go. That is exactly how you're supposed to approach each of these question types. I have explained what you're expected to do, what your task is. For each question type, I have explained the skills that you need to do well in that question type. And finally, I have given you top tips on how to approach that type of question. In other words, exactly what to do. If you found this video helpful, give the video a thumbs up, share the video with somebody else so that they can also benefit from the video, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be uploading more helpful videos on IELTS preparation. And remember, if you want to watch part 1 on how to pass the IELTS reading test, have a look at my pinned comment and you will find a link to part 1 where I have explained how to pass the IELTS reading test and exactly what to do when you are answering matching headings questions. Secondly, true, false, not given, yes, no, not given type of questions. Thirdly, exactly what to do when you're given the matching paragraph information type of questions. And also, number 4, summary completion type of questions. And number 5, how to answer, how to approach, exactly what to do when you're given the sentence completion type of questions. Now, thank you very much, and I shall see you in our next video. Bye-bye.